Well, great. I think we can probably maybe start with introductions. Welcome to our virtual info session for the fourth cycle of the Design Services Program. My name is Cleo Lyons. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the operations manager at the organization. I'll pass things over to Emma.
Hi, my name's Emma Jasinski, she, they pronouns. I am the senior community designer at Design Trust Chicago. So I lead and steward all things design related and specifically this program. And I'll let Catherine introduce herself.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Darnstadt. I am one of the co-founders of Design Trust and the founder of Latent, which is an architecture and urbanism firm. And my pronouns are she, her. So thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
Happy to be here.
Oh, great.
I love it being very personalized.
It is, though. And this is what you will expect. If you're a design services grantee, you will get a very personalized experience throughout your project.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Indeed. Well, yeah, let's get started. We'll begin with a bit of overview on our organization. Design Trust Chicago is a multidisciplinary civic impact design organization. We partner with mission-aligned nonprofits, community organizations, local leaders, and government entities to help connect them with design services and resources. We're guided by a mission of providing accessible design services to create equitable and thriving spaces and places for all Chicagoans. So this is our full team. You see Catherine, Emma, and myself, as well as our other two co-founders, along with Catherine. The organization was founded in the fall of 2020 by the three of them, who are each leaders in Chicago's architecture and urban design space. In response to the lack of robust community design programs, community-centered design programs in Chicago, with the goal of creating and increasing citywide access to design services, particularly in communities of color that have been historically denied access to design processes. Our organizational mission was synthesized from these 6 core values. It's our intention across all of our initiatives and advocacy work to serve our city's vast range of communities and bring their ideas to life through an inclusive, collaborative, and intentional design process. So here is an overview of our primary initiatives that we've engaged in over the past 3 years. At the organization, we like to say that we are a thought leader, an organizer, and an advocate. All of our programs and projects are centered around increasing accessibility to design services for all communities across Chicago. We have worked with the City of Chicago departments to help organize collaborative design teams for various city initiatives, like you'll see under the placekeeping bubble there. Those images are of our projects for Chicago Al Fresco, which was a city initiative aimed at creating active public community spaces across neighborhood corridors on Chicago's south and west sides. We build tools to help share knowledge about the community design process, as you'll see under the design resources bubble. That is our website Mapped, which is a digital library of community spaces and projects across the city. And finally, we work directly with community members and organizations on specific projects to help bring their ideas and visions for their communities to life through a pro bono design services program known as the Design Services Program. So I'll kick things over to Catherine to speak a bit more about that program.
Yes, just to say design services program 3 times in a row, like Beetlejuice, it makes it appear. And so a little bit of what we do is thinking through how do we help you as an organization serve your constituents, do your advocacy better. And a lot of that is wrapped around space and place. And so with that, what we've seen is that our tools as architects, designers, and advocates, we can help make that space more dynamic, more safe, and think about how we use those design services to further community-led projects or further your advocacy through community-led projects. And so we have, if you go to the next slide, we do that through a variety of ways. We take these projects from concept to clarity and then get them to a point where we can hand them over. So design services project can be one or can be many things. It could be, you know, it's just an idea for a space or a place, and we bring kind of clarity to that so that there's, you know, now a design brief that could be moved forward. It could be a feasibility study. We are looking at multiple locations, maybe for our office or for a center or for a new location, and we need support around analyzing if that space will fit our program. It can entail also community planning and engagement. Is this a building or is this an exterior space? Is this a future garden? Is this a vacant lot? Is this a public right of way? Is this a bike lane? You know, how do we look at that all together and kind of craft community planning and engagement? We look at sustainability strategies throughout all of our work and recommendations of how a place or an intervention could be more sustainable. We have acted as owners' reps in portions of projects, and I think Emma will share an example of how that worked through on a project. We look at conceptual design, so maybe there is already a location, so how do we take that idea and that thought of maybe an outdoor pavilion or an outdoor place together and create a conceptual design around that. To do that, it's always programming and space planning. That's how big and how much can fit into a building, a space, a place. Analyze the site. You know, we live in Chicago and most of our projects, except for, I know another one, the next one Emma's going to talk about, we're outside Chicago, but, you know, we need to understand the zoning, the codes, all of these other governing factors from the municipal standpoint. And then finally, we can even if you're further along in a project and you need support of how do you take that next step of getting to a request for proposal or crafting something for a grant funding or anything else, we could help start to assemble and pull that forward. And usually what we found, our design services program, as I mentioned, it's multiple pieces of this. It rarely fits neatly in one category, and that's okay. And so part of both the application and the intake process will be around framing what that project is. And Emma, in the next case study, will kind of share how that has manifested through a couple different projects that we've worked on to date of previous design services grantees.
Thanks, Catherine. So kind of going from high level services of what we can do and showing you examples of some of the grantees from past cycles. So here is EZO Community Development Services. They are an organization based out of Joliet, so just southwest of the city, and providing access and ways towards affordable housing in the Manningdale community. So some of the deliverables we came up with for the organization was looking at various schematic designs for a single family home in the neighborhood. So the organization really wanted to understand, you know, what does serving the community look like in a residential you know, home spatial sense look like. So we worked with them to think about, hey, how many bedrooms, you know, does this want to be 2 stories or 1 story, you know, different considerations of aging in place. But at the end, developing kind of this package of program, of images, floor plans that then they can utilize to engage stakeholders. These are materials that they can use to supplement grant application or use for a capital funding campaign. But really going back to, hey, we want to hand your project off in kind of meeting that next step and offering our community partners a launching point to continue on with their projects. So here, just kind of identifying a little bit of where we were working in Joliet and the site in the neighborhood to the right. We were looking at multiple properties. So again, some clients might be like, yeah, we have a site that we want to look at. Actually, we own multiple properties, or we actually don't own a property. What would that look like, pursuing? So we've had the opportunity to work with different partners in all of those kind of scenarios. So kind of how we go about approaching that is right now, where it's really early and preliminary, let's kind of decide what site you'd like to start with, or kind of test fit one of the sites that then can be adapted in multiple ways. So we always kind of go through a series of providing reference images. Once you are looking to maybe hire an architect or, build out an interior space, what does that want to look like? Let's provide some inspiration images. And then, going a little deeper with some floor plans here. And then always offering some type of kind of rendered or 3D image to kind of start to highlight what that space or that site could potentially be in the future. So while that was an example of kind of schematic visioning, some floor plans, we also offered an RFP. So at the end of that, this partner was really interested in potentially hiring an architect. So what are the questions you need to hire on that professional? So walking them through that process and kind of developing a template and a letter that then they can use to go and pursue hiring various professionals. So also in cycle one, we worked with Free Spirit Media, again, doing some ideation, some floor plan. They were moving into an interior, a new storefront in the North Lawndale neighborhood. So, an organization that works with youth in media literacy. And so, when they're focused on programs and trying to figure out curriculum, it's really beneficial to work with an organization like Design Trust that can kind of help them figure out, navigate kind of the spatial components of moving into a new space and how that can reflect and help, the operations and functions of their work. So, again, we offered up some floor plans of how this space can be used. Where are they going to have their desks? How are they going to be laid out? They want a kitchen. They also have a more open workspace. Thinking about paint colors, interior finish selections. So assisting in that. And then ultimately, providing a vision that could then be used for future build out. So again, kind of that rendering or these supportive materials that then the organization used to apply for grants or funding. So here's kind of before and after of the exterior space. And then the interior, again, new paint colors, helping with renovation of refresh of kind of the kitchen cabinets and tiles. And then cycle 2, we worked with another partner out of the North Lawndale neighborhood, Principal Barbers. The owner of a barbershop, Bobby Price, hosts a monthly jazz series out of his space. So in addition to cutting hair, once a month, he has musical performances. And we were tasked as with thinking about how can we expand this jazz series from his shop to an outdoor space, because it's open to the public, but he really wants this to be something that more people can experience, and specifically highlighting local talent in the North Lawndale community to the larger Chicagoland. So kind of sites you can see here, you have Principal Barbers down the street, and then we were looking just kind of adjacent at an open lot. So again, this partner, didn't have a lot or a site, but that was part of the services we were looking at. Hey, where in the neighborhood could this potentially be? Also looking at kind of zoning, citywide ownership of and honing in on kind of the pros and cons and general feasibility of site options for our partner. And then again, kind of the final being, committing to that potential site, and then implementing the various program and activities they want to see there. All of those ideas coming from community engagement sessions we do with our partners. So on the right, you can see one of our workshops that was hosted at Bobby's Barbershop, and some input from residents in the neighborhood. We also worked with Pilsen Housing Co-op. Going kind of back into the residential space, but a communal residential space. So we worked with Pico and the residents of one of their properties on how do we collectively design or think about the communal spaces within their building. So while they each own their own unit, they also share outdoor space. There's an interior stair with laundry and attic space. So coming up with ideas around how they can potentially build out those areas and provide more function and program for their residents. So Design Trust Chicago, going into the space, kind of measuring the attic and providing options, and again, reference images of the potential of what they could do in those spaces. And then always kind of notated drawings too, to help guide our partners in, okay, these are again drawings that can be helpful. Hey, are you talking to a contractor? Oh, or hey, you need to get carpet, thinking about, is it a carpet tile? Is it rollout? You're going to Home Depot, things like this to kickstart the process. So then that was kind of a highlight of some of our previous grantees, but some things for future partners to expect if they're participating in the process. So I think kind of the three big things we'd like to highlight are, at the beginning and at the end, kind of having a check-in or survey with our partners just to understand from you some of your expectations, and then always how we can improve on this process, and just making sure our partners getting their needs met with this program. We always have bi-weekly meetings with our partners. So we'll kind of go through the timeline in the next slide, but being able to commit to a meeting every 2 weeks, whether that's a half an hour or an hour, that's kind of up to the community partner, but that's what we ask. And then we always require some type of community engagement. So that's something we will co-create with our partner, and really lean on you to help with scheduling, figuring out the venue and community member outreach, as you are the individuals closely connected to your the community or individuals we'll be working with. So here's a timeline of the program. So right now the application period is open. It'll be closed March 1st, which is a Friday. And then March, we will be going through the selection process. So part of that is everyone who applies to the program. We will then follow up with a listening session. So that's an opportunity for us, and then also the applicant to speak further about their potential project, and for us to just gain a better understanding. So that kind of happens in March. And then in April, grantees will be notified. And in April, we'll start to kind of refine the scope, develop a schedule. We have an MOU for you to review. So just going through that with our partners. And then the project will kick off in May and go through October. So project meetings, doing that in community engagement, various design meetings, and then design production and execution, and then project closeout in November. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And part of that, thanks, Emma, for overviewing the projects and the timeline. And part of that intake meeting is helping us to understand the evaluation of the project and how that aligns with these kind of four main pieces of part of our evaluation process. So first, is there capacity? As Emma mentioned, there's a series of meetings that will be happening over the course of this project, and partnership, which really does go throughout a majority of 2024. This process, we have found that while aspirations to do things faster are usually at the beginning of every project, it sometimes just doesn't go that way. So that's why we keep a longer kind of framework for design services to be executed. So nobody feels rushed, and the right amount of time and outreach can be established and implemented as part of it. Are there resources to help the partner, the design services grantee, further the project, right? We want to think about, where does this project fit within kind of the timeline of the overall vision and goals for the organization? And is there something teed up to get to step 2 or 3 or 4? We want to make sure that the services that we're offering, we know they're of value. We know every idea is unique and beneficial, but sometimes projects are a little bit too early, or they might be a little bit later in the overall project timeline, and we might not be the best fit. So we think about capacity, resources, and impact. Does this advance both the organization's mission and does it advance DTC's mission? We have found, as we go through these intakes in conversations with some of the organizations that apply, some projects definitely are a fit and some don't. You know, maybe working for a private developer who has a community focus for a project might not be the right fit, or a project that is too early in the ideation stage. Maybe they need just a day workshop or a half-day workshop versus the whole design services. So those are how we start to measure impact and ultimately value. While we don't make value judgments on what is a beneficial project to a community or to Chicago as a whole, we really want to think about the project potential in terms of both DTC's missions and the organizational mission overall. We think they all have value, but we're always fitting within a sweet spot and aligning both our organizational services and the grantees. With that said, if you go to the next slide, I could also specifically talk about what is not in the design services. You saw some really great renderings and plans and schematics in some of the previous project examples that Emma shared, but we want to make sure that we're not doing actual architectural work like licensed architecture, engineering, or construction work, right? These are more visioning, concept, kind of studies and compiling imagery to help further an idea or for a grant or for any other program. They're not final architectural or engineering drawings. We're not evaluating buildings in terms of a feasibility, like a engineering study or facility study or report. We will help in terms of programming for space planning, but not in terms of a facilities report. And it's a nuance that not everyone might not be aware of at the beginning, right? Because these are, you know, how we define professional services. We kind of understand when a project goes from one scope of programming and space planning to another of facility studies. So that helps part of the intake meeting, because sometimes the wrong term might be used and we want to make sure that we're getting to the crux of the project itself. Our documents can't be used for permit or construction. So they're not to that level because, again, they're not going to be stamped, licensed architectural or engineering drawings. So, but they do help an organization understand a project or talk to a contractor to understand maybe orders of magnitude project costs. We are also not offering graphic design. We are all designers, we're all visual beings, we all have Adobe Photoshop, but we're not, it's graphic design isn't our skill set on this one that we provide. So we just want to also be clear on that. And the example of the image, if you go back, sorry, Cleo, one slide, the example on this image is from another project where it's really space planning. This looks very technical in terms of, you know, the building size, the layout of the chairs and furniture, the square footage, and Emma even showed other examples of projects where it looks very technical, but it is not an architectural drawing. It is not an engineering drawing. This is really just space planning and programming studies. So it might, to you, it might look final, but we know in our profession and our skill sets, and then also what the city requires, it's not a final document, but it has a level of information that I think is very helpful and useful that an organization can use moving forward. All right, the next slide. And then, so how to apply. This is all done through our website. And then if Cleo, if you could drop the link there, you know, it's a very easy form. It's a Google form. There's a series of questions and uploads that we could go through. It is really designed that we feel someone could review it and spend time, maybe about a half hour with it. If you don't know the answer, still put something in as a response, because we do have these intake sessions or the listening sessions that will happen afterwards. There's a further chance to go into more detail. We often find that, you know, working on design and community design projects, this is our everyday, right? And it's not every day and every organization's language. So just put it in there, and then we'll talk further to figure out scope and answer questions more on a one-on-one basis. If we go to the next slide, so I'll answer some of these frequently asked questions. They're also on our website, and we're always adding to them because we get great questions, and I'm sure you'll have some too, Michael, to even ask. So is there a threshold for the number of organizations that we're providing support to? Currently, we will provide support for 1 or 2 grantees in the cycle. It depends. That's where we kind of look at the number of applicants and where's the best fit overall. We have previously provided up to support for up to 2 grantees over the course of the year. And so we know that kind of fits within our capacity overall. What are the main components Design Trust is looking for an application, and are additional qualifications to be mindful of? I think in terms of how we look at this, and then Emma or Cleo, feel free to jump in on this answer. So we're always looking for completeness of an application. We're looking for the ability of that it's, the organization has capacity that to implement after we're done partnering with them. So again, is there a plan of action of how this design services grant can help? This 4 to 6 months of partnership of design services, how does it help further one step of what we know is a multi-step process? And then, Emma, I'm not too sure if you have any other responses to that, but I feel those are kind of some of the items that we're thinking through.
Yeah, I think just one, Catherine covered most of it. I'd just like to add that, yes, sometimes I think it is a timing, you know, fit as well. And while maybe not right now makes sense, we always encourage applicants to, you can apply in the future. If we see applications that, oh, you know what, this might be helpful for you to go through this process before partnering with us, and a design process really being helpful to you right now. Or maybe organizations are even further along and we're like, actually, you're ready to go ahead and hire an engineer or work with an architect. So I think just considering the timing of where your project is at too.
All right. I think that also answered how far does a project need to be along in order to apply? I feel that a project, it needs to be out of your head. Right. So I think that's the earliest point. So it has to be on paper, you have to start thinking about it. There has to be other partners in on it, co-conspirators that are helping to create it. And it has to not be built, right? So that's a pretty big range. I know it's hard to define, but we've had some some applicants apply and the project wasn't fully out of their head. Right. So we might work with them for a couple hours or a workshop to kind of pull out all the questions and ideas and compile it together into just a document. And then they need to, do more research to figure out, did they want to do A or B? Right. And then when they come back and they know we want to do A, that's when a project, starts to make sense for us. Are applicants required to be 501c3s? No. We look for nonprofits, community organizations that might have a fiscal sponsor. We really have a broad range of how we define a community design program and these design services. So if you feel you fall into that, you please apply. We do not work right now with private individuals or kind of private for-profit organizations as part of the design services grant. After project started, what does the process for starting services look like? I think Emma addressed that in kind of the overall timeline, but you'll look for, within that first 30 days of being selected, it's contracting, it's intake meeting, it's probably a site visit and an initial workshop. So there's probably more front-loaded meetings and activity in that first 30 to 45 days of a project start. And then that cadence of meetings every 2 weeks starts to take over. And then if can you submit in future cycles if you're not accepted into the first one? Yes, please tell your friends, all of those things. So, as we get into this, if we find that the project wasn't selected this first time, we do encourage people to continue working on it and apply for another cycle, or even think about setting up another meeting, or maybe a workshop or a 2-hour session or something else might make sense as the project's further along. And then with that, we could go to the next slide and, Emma or Cleo, if you have anything to add, please let me know. Otherwise, we could open it up for some questions.
Yeah, I think if Michael, you have any questions for us or comments, or if you'd like to share of any thoughts around potential projects you have in mind, we're happy to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was very useful. I appreciate you all taking the time to have a session for potential applicants. One of my initial questions is, what is kind of the range of scale for projects that you've taken? Clearly you've taken something where you have multiple, a handful of potential properties that might be a similar structure, all the way down to just kind of doing a concept for effectively a storefront. Like, what is kind of the smallest to the largest scale project that you've worked on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, and you kind of answered a little bit in your question of with projects that say have multiple sites, or we have another project we're working on too, a viaduct, that's the one with MPC, that yeah, maybe we want to do work on all of them, but what we kind of do with the capacity of our team is we'll kind of collectively decide, hey, what one do we want to focus on? And then we'll use that as that test fit or an example or a prototype that then can kind of be repeated. I mean, also with the example of the Timbre Square, the outdoor jazz space for principal barbers. In terms of square footage, I mean, it's really large, so it's kind of hard to say like, well, we max out at, this square footage. When we're talking about outdoor public space, that can kind of be large and things like that. Um, so the range somewhat varies, and I think too, if it gets into a lot of examples, like I said, we kind of go with the approach of, hey, we're gonna do a test study. Otherwise, when you are getting into more detail, I think that kind of goes back to, hey, maybe you're further along, like, oh, we have a 6-story building and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. I mean, if it's that early on, we can still, like, you need space and programming to figure that out, even though that's a lot of square footage. And the space and programming that Catherine was kind of mentioning earlier is a critical part that you'll need before engaging an architect. But if you kind of already know that and you're like, hey, can you start to lay out all of these spaces, and we want to figure that out, then you might be in this kind of point of wanting to hire an architect, or you have a developer on board. So yeah, that was kind of, I was trying to get at different things of potential. I don't know if you have a specific project in mind, but that's kind of how we approached it. Um, yeah, in the past, and I think looking forward. I don't know, Catherine, if you have anything to add.
No, I feel like Michael has a specific example.
We do have a very specific project in mind. I'm debating, do I spoil the surprise or wait until we submit an application?
Yeah,
Um,
because is it about scale in terms of like true square footage, or scale in terms of like idea? I mean, that's kind of
so Better Street Chicago obviously would be transportation focused.
right,
We're
right.
looking at a relatively large corridor, but based
Yep.
on the answer, it sounds like one of the things that, let's say we submit an application and our project is accepted, it sounds like the better approach would be, okay, we have our whole corridor that we're looking at, but maybe we just do a cross section based on one location. Like we pick a spot on the corridor and say, okay, we're going to focus on this 300-foot section of the corridor just to provide kind of a concept of what it might look like instead of doing the whole corridor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
I
Emma,
guess,
that sounds very close to viaducts, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess
Yeah.
also what's helpful for us too, like sometimes, it's like what, because we just see ourselves too, like oftentimes it's hard for people to just get off the ground with some of these ideas, these projects. So it's like, what's the like gatekeeping that's kind of you're running into? So it's like, hey, we're working up towards this grant, or hey, there's this like, government funding, blah blah blah, or we just want to put a pitch. So I think just being strategic, we think about those like, and we kind of back into that in order to, so it's like, hey, that cross section, we can definitely do something like that, but maybe there is still some information or some type of visual or diagram that we might do that still kind of highlights an overall area. Like we also worked with an organization that we did like a test fit of a future space, but they didn't have a site. They don't even know what neighborhood. So they still needed that to be moved along. So then we came up with, hey, these are 3 site options, the pros and cons. Once you get your site, here's an example of, again, what that room or what that storefront might look like, but we can't necessarily commit to, hey, you're going to be in this neighborhood on this site yet, because there's a lot of factors that go in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. Um, okay, no, that's really helpful and definitely help kind of makes me think about how we might approach this. I'm also curious to know a little bit about what partnership with the grant awardees has looked like for you in the past. I'm thinking about for the project idea that we have, we're currently trying to put together a team of people who can help working on it. But part of the challenge that we have is BSC is a very small organization. We barely have staff members in any real sense. We're working towards that. Um, so what we're looking for assistance is with kind of some of this higher level design stuff that we just simply don't necessarily have the skills for in-house. But we do have a lot of people who have been volunteering time to work on this project with us who would be able to provide assistance in a variety of capacities, potentially including even some supportive work around the design stuff. And coming from as a very urban planning focused organization, for example, like we got people out the wazoo who can make a map, but we don't have people who can do things like like higher quality renderings and things like that, which is kind of what we're looking for. What is like I'm curious to know what it has looked like in the past as you've worked with different teams, and basically, what is kind of the spectrum of engagement that you've been able to have has it been pretty, some teams just do kind of the minimum required level of engagement to, do you have like higher levels where there's a lot of back and forth and interaction with each other? I ask because I'm thinking like we would love to be able to provide maximum level of support for you all as well.
Yeah, no, you're asking all the right questions, Michael. Um, And I think, yeah, we highlight the fact that we do want, in order for us to be able to continue to move the project along and get the appropriate feedback, we do want like one point person from your
Mhm.
side on the team, or like on this project. So just so we have kind of clarity, who are we going to be communicating with? While that can kind of, hey, Michael, you might not be at the next meeting, and it's, Simone, and she's kind of focused on this. Like, that's fine. Like, we can kind of work through
Mhm.
that. It's just about having knowing that you need to have like some type of representation and continuity as
Mhm.
far as like who's kind of leading the project on your end. Because like again with like the community engagement, that's a critical important component of this. And while say you're like, oh, we're kind of the back, or we're doing the project management or the logistics, but we're also partnering with this group. So then to bring in that partner who is then going to work, more closely on where we're going to be doing a workshop or something, that's fine. So yeah, I feel like in the past, to give you more examples, whoever kind of submits the application there is one point person, but as the process, there's different, stages of the project, of the engagement, or maybe more design charrette. There might be different people from your side or the community partner side plugging in at times. So we can be flexible, but we do want there to be like um one like common person throughout the whole process, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. That
Yeah.
that would certainly be the case for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I only have one other specific question. Do you have any advice on things that have sunk applications in the past that maybe organizations or the people submitting them might not have suspected to be a weak point to be aware of? Lacking details on certain things, um, uh, maybe points of experience for an organization that are good to point out that is useful for you all to know. I mean, just kind of, general things that have come up in past applications that you've seen that maybe an organization would have had, but they didn't realize they should mention or bring up as part of their application process.
Um, yeah, I think we usually we'll get into more of those specific questions in our listening session too, of like, hey, but I think up front, the more you can just talk about um any like community partners or uh how have you built capacity, and so that's how I see a project builds capacity, is because you have these other partners, and that can be anything from what you've already mentioned. I'm not saying like, well, we have, this stakeholder and they're funding, it could just be like you said, oh, we have a really supportive volunteer group of urban planners that are pretty active, or two individuals that are really interested in this project, and they would be, you
Mhm.
know once a month, so kind of like highlighting that too, because uh it's great to just understand kind of the energy around it, kind of what momentum or what, yeah, kind of what's the dedication level. And also, that being said too, it's like we've worked with organizations that it's just one person and they're super passionate, and they're too just like, I'm committed to this, and on calls with us one-on-one too. So
Okay.
um yeah,
No,
I
that's
don't know.
actually that's a very helpful answer.
I feel
And,
like all my
and it's okay
answers
to
I'm
like
giving you my, yeah.
yeah, no, that's a really helpful answer, but and like immediately built off that, like it's fine if we reference in our application materials other things that we have done that maybe are not part of the project we're applying for, but as a way to provide context into how the organization functions, how we've developed relationships in the past, and how we plan to use those experiences in this current space, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's hard because it's like we realize we're coming in and we're in this preliminary design. So it's the very early beginning. So, trying to kind of formalize something that hasn't been formalized, we understand. So I think for us, it's just like whatever, like just any thoughts or ideas you can get off. That's why these listening sessions are really helpful, because it's just kind of so early in the idea or the planning of it, and we're trying to create structure and figure out what structure is needed from you. So
Mhm.
I think too, even, yeah, that's like little things that might not seem as, yeah, can be really great from skill sets you have, or people interested, or just, hey, we were thinking about this project or that, so
Okay.
Cleo, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, just echoing what you're saying about our listening session, they're instrumental in sort of gathering that design narrative behind each project that's crucial for us to understand how to best partner with them.
Okay. Awesome. I don't have any other questions unless you all have any questions for me. I know it's a strange situation with just the one person today.
No worries at all.
Oh, it worked out well. And I think one thing I want to add is that I kind of took that last question, I interpreted it a little different. And I heard you say, where in the past have projects or grantees, you know, not expected something or not expected the time it would take for something. And I would say across the board, everyone underestimates the time to get through the MOU on this project. So making sure you have someone to review that and answer any questions. We're very straightforward and happy to answer questions, but I know for some organizations that are volunteers, you're like, oh my gosh, who's looking at this seemingly legal document? Like making sure you have someone to do that or support. So that's really great. I think
Definitely
the
have
other
that person, fortunately.
Okay. So that's helpful. I think the other piece to think about in terms of time or expectations of time is around some of the community engagement sessions. So I know many of our organizations have their own community, whether it's geographic, advocacy based, thematic, or project specific. There is community that they want to reach out to. And so thinking about the time that it takes to develop that, manage it, execute it, all those things. Because while Design Trust does support that, that is not something that we're necessarily leading, because it has to come from you as the organization versus from us, who's ultimately, a consultant, really,
Yeah.
when was part of the project. So I think those are two areas where more time gets dedicated than initially anticipated.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, that was definitely a detail I noted, but not something I think would be a challenge for our organization, fortunately. Okay. Great. I don't have any further questions. So maybe that means y'all can save 1 minute.
Right
Well,
on
thank you.
time. Perfect.
Yeah,
Awesome.
perfect. Thank you so
Amazing.
much for your questions, Michael, and we
Yeah,
look forward
absolutely.
to
Thank you
seeing
so
your
much.
application.
Yes,
And
thank
yeah,
you.
definitely anticipate an application from us soon.
No problem. Yep.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.